The next thing we're going to go over in the map is flight routes. The United States is covered with a number of flight routes. So if you go out and there's a number of airplanes in the sky, they often are flying in the same direction. That's because they're following flight routes. Now there are two types. IR, instrument navigation. You must be instrument certified to fly a commercial flight. VR, visual flight routes. Now, IR planes are going to fly much higher and typically not present us an issue. While VR are flying, because they're flying by looking down on the ground and say, oh, we're flying this highway or this river or something, they typically fly at a much lower elevation. Now on the map, if you see gray or black airways, they are military routes. So those are what the military uses. The blue ones are Victor Airways, and they are the ones that are used by civilian aircraft. Military training routes are used by military aircraft to maintain proficiency in tactical flying. The routes are usually established below 10,000 feet, some higher. Pay attention to this. Operations in excess of 250 knots. The routes are designated by IFR, instrument navigation, or VFR, visual navigation. So military training routes can be visual or instrument. Typical routes above 1,500 feet AGL are flown under instrument flight rules. So if you're doing an instrument, you typically are flying above 1,500 feet. Routes flown under 15 feet AGL are flown under visual flight rules. MTRs are military training routes with 4 numbers. They note flights flown at 1,500 feet AGL and below. So although this is reversed or counterintuitive, 4 numbers are the lower flights. So at such low altitude, this may present challenges to unmanned aircraft. Military training routes with 3 numbers denote routes flown with at least one segment above 1,500 feet. Okay, we look at this map. We see gray, military training routes. Now we look at the top arrow, we see VR 1010. And if we look at the bottom one, it says IR 23. So the bottom one is an instrumental route, so they can be higher, and the VR means that the aircraft will be lower. So MTRs with no segment above 1,500 feet must be identified by 4 characters. MTRs that include one or more segments below 1,500 feet are 3 characters. It's important to know this so you can expect low-flying military helicopters flying this route, some of which may be 400 feet or below. So once again, we see some military training routes which are in gray on the map. So when is MSL used and when is AGL used? MSL is mean sea level, and if the information is designated to be used primarily by pilots, they use MSL. If the information is designed exclusively for drone operators, then it is an AGL. Not a hard, fast rule, but a good guideline. So a quick review, Class A, we can't go there and it's over 1,800 feet. Class B, big airport, you must get permission, solid. B is blue. C is large. Yes, you need permission, solid magenta. D, dashed blue. Yes, you need permission. Class E, dashed magenta. Yes, you need permission. Class E, and it's designated by a gradient blue or magenta line. Why don't you need it? Because it starts above the 400 feet that we can fly. Review of special use. Prohibited. Blue hatch line with the name P and 2 to 4 digits. Can you fly? No. Restricted. Blue hatch line with a name starting with R and 3 to 4 digits. If active, you cannot fly there without permission, and you check legend. If inactive or cold, then you can fly. National security areas, purple box with call out. Technically, you can fly there, but it is dangerous. Warning areas, MOAs, and alert areas. Magenta hash line with the name alert or MOA, and you can fly there with caution. Military training routes are gray lines. If it's below 1,500 feet, it's 4 digits. If it's above 1,500 feet, it is 3 digits. So you can fly with caution. Air defense identification drones, line with dots, no flight allowed. Temporary flight restrictions. It's not on the chart, but places with sporting events, aerial firefighting, air shows, rocket launchers, presidential movements. Those are temporary, and you are supposed to check whether one is in place, probably using your drone app, and you're not allowed to fly in TFR zones. So the following video provides a review of the information on airspace. This is a complex material. I suggest you look at all the material, maybe review it several times, go through this lecture several times, and I wish you success. Thank you.
This gets weird. You probably heard your pilot when you're sitting in the back of Delta. They'll be like, "Oh, we're now entering Class B airspace." Let's find out what all that is. Here's a diagram from the FAA. At the top, you have this big Class A airspace that pretty much covers everything from 18,000 feet up over the U.S. And this is when you look up and you see airplanes like going overhead, even if you're out in the wilderness, that's because they're flying in Class A airspace. That's where airliners are going. That's sort of long haul stuff. As you get around airports will start to claim different sections of airspace below that point. They won't go into Class A airspace no matter how big the airport is. The lower the letter, the bigger it is, really. So Class B airspace is for major airports, something like JFK, LAX, Boston. These are Class B airspaces, and they call it an upside down wedding cake because it has these tiers that get smaller at the base. So this kind of makes sense, right? And think about how airplanes land. They start up high and then they come down. You want to be sure that whole airspace is cleared so that other stuff isn't getting in the way of these airplanes. When a pilot comes into Class B airspace, they need permission to enter that airspace. So they'll call the air traffic control and be like, "Hey, can I come into Class B airspace?" And they'll be like, "Yes or no, you can or can't do that." And of course, they'll come down. Class B is for the biggest airports. It covers the biggest space. It has those like 3 tiers traditionally. Those tiers can change shape. We'll look at maps in a little bit and kind of get a better sense for how big those tiers are. Class C airspace is for smaller airports, like regional airports, like in this area, you know, it might be like the Bradley Airport. You probably don't know that. And it typically has these 2 tiers, one small tier and then one bigger tier. And then Class D airspace is for kind of really small airports. They might not have a tower at all. And Class D airspace, you'll be, when you start to look at maps, charts, you'll be shocked at how much of the world, how much of the continent is covered in Class D airspace. There are places where like everything is covered in Class D airspace, which is a pain because you cannot legally fly your drone in Class D airspace, well, without ATC permission, without air traffic control permission. And this is what you really need to know for the test. If you're in any of those airspaces, except for like Class G airspace, which is just general airspace, or Class E airspace, you can fly in those. But if you're in Class B, C, or D airspace, or Class A airspace, you can't fly your drone in there, okay? You're probably not going to get up into Class A airspace, so I wouldn't worry about it. Well, you could fly your drone if you had permission from air traffic control. So that's the answer. Here's a sample question. According to some law, the remote pilot in command, that's you. You'll see this a lot. PIC, remote PIC, that's just you. You are flying a small unmanned aircraft and you're planning to operate within Class C airspace. What do you have to do? Do you have to use a visual observer, which is somebody who's helping you out watching it? No. Are you required to file a flight plan? No. Are you required to receive ATC authorization? Yes, you just need permission from air traffic control. Real world stuff here, you can no longer just call air traffic control as a drone operator. You're not allowed to do that. Instead, you have to go to this FAA portal online and request a waiver and then ask the FAA for permission, and the FAA will kind of interface to that airport and ask if it's okay for you to fly. You have to give them 90 days to get a waiver. So remember earlier when I said Class D airspace seems to cover most of the United States? That means you would need a waiver to fly in any of that Class D airspace. And to fly it, you would need to file it 90 days ahead of time and get permission. Not everybody gets permission to fly in this Class D airspace. And then what, 90 days later, it might be raining or something and you can't do it. So the process right now is a pain, but the FAA is working to kind of smooth it out. Here's another sample test question. You've been hired to inspect the tower under construction at an airport at a particular coordinates. What must you receive prior to flying your unmanned aircraft in this area? Authorization from the military? No. Remember I told you all these groups that won't give you authorization? Not the military, not the National Park Service, even if it's in a park, even if it's in a military operations area. They don't want you calling the military or calling the Park Service. You need permission from the air traffic control. And the way you do that is through an FAA portal, but I didn't get questions asking me about the portal, just that I need permission from the ATC. According to another law, how may a remote pilot operate an unmanned aircraft in Class C airspace? Okay, starting to see a trend here, right? The remote pilot must have prior authorization from air traffic control. They're going to try to trick you. Do you have to monitor the ATC frequency? Do you have to contact ATC? No, you have to have authorization from ATC, the air traffic control. Here's what a sectional chart looks like. And this is such a small piece of this. The sectional chart is actually a really big, massive, and scary piece of paper. We have one for this area, and it's absolutely huge. And as you look at it, it is so cluttered with information that it's almost impossible to discern what the hell is going on. And that is the key challenge in this part of the test, is just discerning their just really old and terribly formatted sectional charts. I suggest you get the chart for your region. You can download older charts at sdp.io/chart. All like real pilots are required by law to carry one of these things around, and we do have a physical one. It's cool to have. You can just pretty much go on and buy one on Amazon or something, or stop by an airport in your area. They'll probably be able to sell you one. First of all, these sectional charts have a legend. And when you're taking the test, they will give you the legend. The legend tells you just about everything you need to know to get all those sectional chart questions correct. This is great news because understanding these charts is a freaking nightmare and requires you to memorize lots of stuff, except you don't have to memorize it because of the legend. So let's look at the first part of the legend here. As we look at this, you can see they're telling you lots of things. They're showing you some diagrams of the airports here. They're telling you what, like, circle on an H, it's a heliport. And they're also telling you what, this is something you're more likely to see on the test, is the airport data. So over each airport, there's going to be a little diagram that has some of this information, not necessarily all this information. They don't put it there for everything, including like the code for the airport and the frequency for the airport. Look, if you're wondering what Unicom is, they might ask you what the Unicom frequency for an airport is. The legend will tell you Unicom and then point to an arrow that shows you the right number. So you might be feeling overwhelmed when the test asks you to find the Unicom for an airport. Take a deep breath, look at the legend, and then just match it up. So you don't necessarily have to remember which of that mess of numbers is the Unicom. All of those different numbers are explained in the legend, so you don't have to memorize that. Here's another part of the legend. For example, this legend tells us that the blue lines here indicate Class B airspace, the magenta lines indicate Class C airspace, and then the dotted blue lines, Class D airspace. They tell you what the number in the box means. That's the ceiling of the Class D airspace. You can see Class E airspace for really small airports is in like this dashed magenta here. All those crazy lines, if you're wondering what they mean, come back to the legend. If you forget the difference between blue and magenta, as any person would, come back to the legend and you can see. There's a whole section here on the different towers and exactly what that means. You can see that they even tell you that this first number here actually means above sea level, while the second number in parentheses means above ground level. So even if you forget everything I taught you about charts and you get there, take some time and look at the legend and just refresh your memory. Let's take a look at what airspace looks like on a chart, how these, what they call sectional charts. I would call them maps. They call them sectional charts. Airspace indicates. Okay, so this is kind of my local area here, and the Groton Airport is here. And if you're wondering about the airspace, look, there's a dashed blue line right through here. And maybe you've already forgotten whether a dashed blue line is B, C, or D. Again, go up to your legend here, and here you'll see a dashed blue line is Class D airspace. See, you don't have to know anything about the chart. You can already figure this stuff out once you know how to piece it together. What frequency do you need if you want to contact the Groton Airport and you're in an airplane and you have a radio and you're not flying a drone because it wouldn't be legal, but they'll want you to know how to do this? Well, it's going to be the 125.6, but if you were confused about that, again, you could just look at it. What does the number 25 in the box mean there? See number 25 in a box? If you're not sure what that means, go back, look at the legend again, and you'll see, like, they have an example here, number in a box. That's the ceiling of the Class D airspace in hundreds of feet. So the number 25 in a box, that means the ceiling of the Class D airspace is 2,500 feet. The top of it. Meaning if you were a private pilot in like a manned airplane, you could be cruising along at 2,600 feet and not have to call in for permission to enter. That's what that number means. I know these charts are overwhelming, but I promise if you take it and you look at tiny small pieces of the chart and you refer to the legend, you can make sense out of it. Even full-blown pilots with many years of experience are frustrated and confused by the maps. So if it feels overwhelming, I get it. This is the Boston area, Logan Airport. And what you'll see here are concentric blue circles. Remember when I showed you that chart of the upside down wedding cake? That's what these are indicating, the different altitudes of the Class B airspace around Logan. You'll see some numbers here, 70 over 30. This is the upper and lower limit of the Class B airspace. It's not 70 feet and 30 feet. No, the FAA has decided to drop 2 zeros from the numbers. So 70 means 7,000, 30 means 3,000. They often do this, and so they will never drop 3 zeros or 1 zero. They will always drop 2 zeros if they're dropping zeros. It is a weird standard that you don't really see in other places on the planet. Like they could drop 3 zeros and put a K there and call it like 7K over 3K, and that would make sense to most humans. But the FAA has their own kind of way of doing this, and it's worked out great for a long, long time. If you look closely at this, you can actually see a little diagram of what the runways look like at Boston Airport. And you can see that, oh, there are some little mountains here. If you were to look really closely, you could see the exact elevation of these different peaks. All the information is there. The hard part is weeding out the information you need from the stuff you don't necessarily need. Here's a super close-up of those numbers. And this is how you need to think about the chart. You need to look really close. When you get this close, it can start to make sense and not be overwhelming. Here's a question from their practice test, but it's just like you'll see on the real test. What is the floor of the Savannah Class C airspace at the shelf area, the outer circle? And then they're going to give you 3 numbers, 1,300 feet. And in this particular question, you'll probably see maybe it'll be 25 over 13. 25 would be the ceiling of the Class C airspace, and 13 would be the floor of the Class C airspace. Because remember, it's like a tier. It's floating out there. These numbers are always above sea level, which is MSL, not AGL, which is above ground level. If you have a hard time remembering if it's sea level or ground level, well, the legend tells you that, so you can refer back to that. You can also think back to the history of the FAA, because the FAA was founded before like proper computers and electronics and GPS and stuff. So somebody in an airplane, they could have an altimeter, which would use barometric pressure to kind of determine what their altitude was based on the air pressure. But of course, that altimeter would only know above sea level. It wouldn't be able to tell if you were flying over a mountain or something. So modern GPS could figure out above ground level, but these older airplanes could only determine sea level. So of course, they're going to write on the charts the altitude above sea level. So right away, you can eliminate AGL. And then you just have to look, does it say 13 for 1,300 or 17 for 1,700? Let's look at another close-up. This is an extreme close-up of a red flag. That red flag is important on the map. That indicates a VFR checkpoint. VFR stands for Visual Flight Rules. This is like a little beacon that pilots could use during navigation. Again, kind of heralds back to days before complicated GPS and stuff. What they want you to know about these red flags is planes might use them as beacons, and therefore there might be more planes in this area. The planes probably aren't going to be flying below 400 feet, but they want you to know this because they're really concerned about drones flying into airplanes. Here's another super, super close-up of a tiny, tiny section of a map. I just wanted to show, in this particular example, you can see 41 over SFC. This means the ceiling of the airspace is 4,100 feet. You want to add 2 zeros, and then SFC stands for surface. You can see a little map of the airport there. Look, that little dot, it's got a tower. So you can see exactly which direction the runways are pointing in. And there's lots of information about like the nearby peaks, that kind of thing. Let's take a look at another close-up here. Well, we do have a tower here. And you can see it even says the name of it. Here's something else, and this is the altitude, and this is above sea level, and then 233 is the altitude above ground level. So they're telling you both the altitude of that tower above sea level and above ground level, so you could use either. You could also subtract those two numbers and figure out what the altitude of the ground level was at that particular point. It would be 513 minus 233. So what is that? Like 280 would be the altitude. Those don't have the two zeros there. That tower is not at, 51,000 feet. Here's another interesting marking. See the little parachute dude there? That means that there might be skydiving in there. It might just be recreational skydiving out of this particular airport. That's the kind of thing that's actually kind of practical. You should know if there might be skydivers in the area, because skydivers will pass through that space from 0 to 400 feet, and you don't want to crash into them. That's one of the reasons you really need to be keeping your eye out. Don't fly your drone into skydivers. More icons here. Here, this particular airport has skydiving, and it also has gliders. And they just draw a picture of a glider. You can also see, look, there's the visual flight rules little beacon there, as well as all this information about this, pretty small airport. So here's a question about these charts. With ATC authorization, in this imaginary world where you could actually get authorization, you're operating your drone approximately 4 statute miles SM southeast of this airport. Which hazard is indicated in that area? High density military operations in the vicinity, an unmarked balloon on a cable, either above ground level or above sea level. Again, it's probably going to be above sea level. And in this, I'm not showing you the right chart, but you'll see a picture of a balloon when you look at this particular one. Just know that when you actually find the location on the chart, there's going to be a picture of a parachuting guy or a balloon, and sometimes there'll be a note that just says the balloon. I'll give you links to these practice tests so you can actually take them. I don't want to give away the answers to the actual practice test so much, because I want you to actually work through it. So at another airport, which frequency should be used for CTAF communications? If you're like, how do I know which of those numbers is CTAF? Come back to your legend. See here, see the legend says follows the common traffic advisory frequency, CTAF. It indicates this little C. So you can just look at the airport data. See this C? That means that it's this number here. And the star here indicates that it operates only part-time. It's all in the legend. You might have been tempted to look at this number. That's the ATIS, the Automatic Terminal Information Service, which might have information on rental cars or whatever. So when in doubt, go back to that legend and just make sure that you're looking at the right number. Let's move on. Okay, you'll see these like kind of blue paths here. Those are just indicating frequent flight paths. And all the FAA wants you to know about these is that there might be more airplanes in there. They're not going to be flying under 400 feet in all likelihood, but they want you to know to just use extra caution. Let's talk about prohibited areas. These maps will have lots and lots of prohibited areas and military operations areas, lots of places either you shouldn't fly at all or you should use caution around. And the prohibited areas you just shouldn't fly. And this is the one from the FAA samples, but it's actually indicating Camp David, where presidents like to vacation and stuff. So they don't want any air traffic over this place. Restricted areas are not as restrictive as prohibited areas. They have different types of rules and stuff. And here's a sample restricted area. Again, the legend will tell you that these like blue lines with the lines here indicate a restricted area, but they also tend to just write it out. There's numbers here that start with the R and then have a code. If you look at your sectional charts over in the bottom or the margin of the sectional chart, there'll be some notes about when exactly it's restricted. Usually there's some sort of hours. And I think the test will even ask you to look up a phone number there. I don't actually see any phone numbers in my sectional charts, but they will have frequencies where you can listen to get some information about whether it might be in use or not. Specifically, the FAA wants you to know this language about restricted areas. Restricted areas denote the existence of unusual, often invisible, hazards to aircraft, such as artillery firing, aerial gunnery, or guided missiles. Restricted areas. Just want you to associate in your mind that language. Let's talk about the MOAs, the military operation areas. Here's an example of the military operation area on a map. These are places where, people might, the military, Air Force, Navy, anybody with planes might be flying exercises. Used to live in an MOA. It's not like they're deserted areas. They can have, you know, towns and neighborhoods and stuff. And when the military would be doing exercises, I'd get like weird, like huge dual rotor helicopters, or like a convoy of massive cargo planes coming in at like 600 feet and just like causing my whole house to shake. These MOAs are kind of like all over the place, and it doesn't mean you can't fly in an MOA, but the FAA wants you to exercise extreme caution, of course, because it really can be dangerous, and they really do fly very low often, and to just check the information in your chart or your sectional. We'll talk about those docs in a little bit. Military training routes, which might be indicated with the letters MTR, IR, or VFR. Here's an example of what they look like on a map. This is the FAA sample. You can see this particular one shows IR 037. And that's just an example. You might also see it indicated as VR, not VFR, but VR. Here's a sample question related to it. The chart shows a gray line with VR 1667, VR 1617, etc. Could this area present a hazard to the operations of a small UA, unmanned aircraft? In general, they're not going to present you a question and the answer be like, no, you're fine, just do whatever. They're always going to present hazardous situations. So right away, we could pretty much eliminate no as an answer, even if we had no idea what it was talking about. In this particular case, the answer is B. Yes, these VR lines indicate military training routes that go from the surface to 1,500 feet above ground level. We know it's 1,500 feet because it's a 4-digit code. You probably won't need to know that in the test. Either way, it goes down to ground level, and that indicates that planes really might be flying under 400 feet, so it really could be an issue for you.